turned into one of the more inspired creative pivots in sitcom history. Proof that sometimes the accident is better than the original plan. That'd be why the time the earliest episodes aired, Anthony was long forgotten. What had started as a casting adjustment, they'd walk into a scene, drop one absurd line, and bring the house down. Lenny and Squiggy weren't background players on Laverne and Shirley. They were pure comic disruption in leather jackets, hijacking every moment they appeared in. But few people know how these two unknown comedians talked their way onto one of the biggest sitcoms of the 1970s, or why the show's stars stayed quiet for years about what filming with them was actually like. The real story involves a living room party, a last-minute character rewrite, and a level of on-set chaos that rarely made it past the editing room. Long before the catchphrase, before the crowds who tuned in every week just to hear that unmistakable greeting, Lenny and Squiggy were nothing more than two friends goofing around at a party. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall would recall the night for decades afterward, always laughing at how it started. It happened in Penny Marshall's own living room. There was no audition, no formal tryout, just a relaxed evening with friends, drinks, and conversation, the kind of gathering Penny and her husband at the time, Rob Reiner, hosted often. Their circle was full of actors, writers, and comics, and that particular night, two guests stood out: David Lander and Michael McKean. Penny already knew the pair through their work with The Credibility Gap, a comedy troupe that had earned a devoted following throughout the 70s for its sharp improvisational style. As the evening went on, something shifted. Almost without warning, Lander and McKean slid out of themselves and into two entirely different people. One moment they were guests at a party. The next, they'd become two strange, endearing misfits, complete with odd accents and nervous energy that felt completely genuine, not performed. The room lost it. According to Penny, the two didn't need any coaxing. They simply slipped into the bit on their own. Cindy remembered the pair having an almost telepathic rhythm together, playing off each other so naturally it felt like they'd rehearsed for years, even though nothing was written down. Penny didn't need a script to recognize what she was watching. Raw comic instinct, built on timing, interruption, and the kind of pause that makes an audience lose it before a punchline even lands. The timing mattered. Laverne and Shirley was still finding its footing, a working-class comedy about two friends trying to make it on their own. And while the bond between the leads carried the show, Gary Marshall, Penny's brother and the show's producer, wanted more. Characters who could crash into a scene, stir things up, and vanish just as fast. So Penny made the pitch to her brother, insisting he needed to see these two guys. The next day, Lander and McKean were called to the studio. No formal casting process, just a chance to show what they could do. And once they stepped onto the soundstage, the living room magic returned instantly. They didn't simply perform. They took over the room the same way they had the night before. What began as an unscripted party bit had, almost overnight, turned into television history. Not through calculation, but because two performers happened to have a rare kind of chemistry that Penny recognized the second she saw it. When the show first sketched out these two neighborhood characters, the plan looked different. The duo wasn't originally Lenny and Squiggy at all. The second character was written as Anthony, an Italian guy from the block, meant to appear alongside Lenny in what was supposed to be a single guest spot. The problem, as Penny explained it later, was simple. The show already had plenty of Italian characters, from Phil Foster's Frank DeFazio to Eddie Mecca's Carmine Ragusa. Adding another one risked overcrowding that particular flavor of humor. So the writers scrapped Anthony and replaced him with Andrew Squiggy Squigman. Same duo, same comic function, but a completely different identity. His background became vaguer, somewhere between German and Eastern European depending on the episode, but that detail hardly mattered. What counted was the sound of the name itself. Odd, punchy, and instantly memorable, a perfect complement to the plainer, everyman quality of Lenny. That rewrite did more than change a name. It freed the characters from any specific cultural anchor and let them become something broader and stranger. Two guys defined entirely by their own weird logic rather than where they came from. Once the shift happened, everything about the pairing clicked into place. The exaggerated posture, the strange cadence, the accents. They became, in Penny's words, characters who seemed to operate in their own private universe, dropping into scenes just long enough to cause trouble before disappearing again. Lenny's full name, Lenny Kosnowski, got the same comic treatment, deliberately clunky and funny before he even opened his mouth. Cindy Williams considered the renaming a turning point, noting that once the pair became Lenny and Squiggy, audiences seemed to sense trouble was coming the instant they heard the names, let alone saw the characters. The change also gave the writers more freedom. The two could show up anywhere in a script, as neighbors, co-workers, or pure comic interruptions, without needing much justification. Gary Marshall, who prized tight pacing above almost everything, appreciated the simplicity of it. They'd enter, get their laugh, and leave, and that formula worked every time. Penny knew Lander and McKean were funny. Her brother Gary saw something more structural. To him, sitcom comedy worked like a kind of social equation. You needed contrast, characters reaching upward and characters positioned just below them, a reminder that things could always be worse. He viewed Laverne and Shirley through that lens. Two working-class women trying to climb out of their circumstances in Milwaukee, already sympathetic and funny in their own right, but still missing a counterweight. Someone louder, messier, and less put together to play off of. That's where Lenny and Squiggy fit in. Gary didn't see it as putting the characters down. He saw it as architecture. Every grounded character needs a wild card nearby, and every emotional beat needs a pressure valve waiting in the wings. Lenny and Squiggy served exactly that purpose, bursting into tense or heartfelt moments and instantly resetting the emotional temperature of the scene. Cindy once compared Gary's instincts to a kind of comic mathematics. He seemed to know exactly how long to let a laugh build and precisely when to cut away before it went stale. With Lenny and Squiggy, that formula was airtight. Audiences knew that whenever the door opened for those two, a laugh was guaranteed. But it wasn't just about timing, it was about proportion. Laverne and Shirley weren't flawless heroines. They were flawed, human, relatable. For the contrast to work, the characters beneath them on Gary's imagined ladder needed to be absurd enough that the two leads looked composed by comparison. Lenny and Squiggy filled that role perfectly, their disorder making Laverne and Shirley's own chaos look almost tame. That balance gave the show its identity, grounded female leads paired with pure slapstick disruption. Without the two neighborhood misfits, the show risked becoming just another story about roommates chasing rent and romance. With them, it became something stranger and more memorable, a mix of dreamers and disruptors that felt true to life. As McKean later put it, they were happy playing the bottom rung of that ladder, the chaos that made everyone else look sane by comparison. Some television moments are recognizable by sound alone. For this show, it was a creaking door followed by a single word, hello. No matter what the scene had been about, however serious or emotional, that greeting flipped the entire mood of the room. Nobody executed that shift better than Lander and McKean. Gary Marshall was famous for demanding precision timing from his cast, and the show moved at a brisk pace overall. But with these two characters, it wasn't just rehearsed timing. It read as pure instinct. They didn't simply walk into a scene. They arrived with an unmistakable presence. Penny recalled that the moment the door creaked, audiences were already laughing in anticipation because they knew exactly what was coming. The physical choreography behind it was more calculated than it looked. Lenny's easy grin, Squiggy's stiff-legged strut, the exact half-second pause before the punchline landed. Cindy described it as controlled chaos. An entrance so well-rehearsed it appeared accidental. That brief pause before hello gave the audience just enough time to brace for the laugh that followed. Part of what made it work was the willingness to break rules. The two characters had no real reason to be barging into the girl's apartment, yet they did so constantly, disrupting romantic scenes and emotional moments alike, turning tension into laughter almost instantly. McKean later admitted that sometimes they'd simply open the door and stand there in silence, letting the audience's own anticipation do the work before a single word was spoken. Off-camera, keeping composure was its own challenge. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall spent plenty of takes biting back laughter, trying not to break character while Lenny and Squiggy tore through a scene. Penny once joked that she nearly bit through her own tongue trying to hold it together. Their improvisation had boundaries, though. Gary ran a tightly timed show, and any spontaneous addition had to serve the scene rather than derail it. McKean described the goal as keeping the rhythm alive rather than throwing his scene partners off balance. Even so, unplanned moments, a flubbed line, a muttered aside, often became some of the best material, and the crew had to stifle their own laughter behind the cameras and sound equipment. Before difficult scenes, Penny and Cindy developed a simple defense. Avoid eye contact entirely, because one glance at either character's exaggerated expression was enough to break the whole take. Gary, despite his obsession with structure, learned to let those spontaneous moments breathe rather than cutting them short, recognizing when lightning had struck and instructing editors to keep the footage as it was. Being funny was one thing. Keeping a scene from collapsing into pure noise was another. Cindy and Penny weren't just the stars of the show. They were its stabilizing force. Whenever the two supporting characters crashed into a moment, the entire energy of the room shifted, and it fell to the leads to keep the story from getting swallowed whole. Cindy summed up the dynamic simply. They were the steady rhythm, while Lenny and Squiggy were the sudden cymbal crash. If the leads didn't stay grounded, the show could easily tip into chaos. Penny, who'd absorbed plenty about sitcom pacing from her brother and her earlier work on The Odd Couple, understood that comedy isn't just about who's the funniest in the room. It's about who holds the frame steady so the audience can follow the movement around them. That restraint became its own quiet skill, reacting just enough to sell a joke without letting it spiral into pandemonium, exchanging a perfectly timed glance that did more comedic work than any line of dialogue could. Decades later, people still remember Laverne and Shirley for its theme song and its two leads in matching factory jackets. But just as vividly, they remember the door bursting open for two lovable misfits. Lenny and Squiggy proved that flawed, chaotic characters could steal a show without ever threatening its heart. Their partnership extended well beyond the series. McKean went on to acclaimed roles in film and television, while Lander became a respected voice actor.